As a party of adventurers quests through the snow-covered lands of Titan's Hammer, the winds howling around them as they navigate the treacherous terrain. Suddenly, an enormous icy boulder crashes nearby, sending shards of ice flying and leaving them perplexed as it deals no cold damage despite its frosty appearance. As they regroup, they spot towering frost giants emerging behind the cliffs. The giants roar and charge in, swinging their massive great axes. And as the adventurers brace for battle, combat ensues. However, they find themselves merely fending off large barbarians rather than the formidable giants they anticipated. Despite the giants' imposing size, they're simply fighting oversized warriors who lack the terrifying presence and unique tactics one would expect from such creatures of Norse mythology. Sound familiar? You aren't the only one, trust me. I've run frost giants before. They're actually one of my favorite giants aesthetically. On paper, they seem like a terrible force to be reckoned with when you read their lore. However, in practice, they often come off merely as hill giants but slightly better. Well, we're gonna warm the icy heart of Thrym and his people, get the glow up they truly deserve. Stay tuned as we transform these giants into the mighty, fearsome beings that they were always meant to be. Alright, so here we are with the 2014 Statblock. What we're looking for with a Frost Giant Statblock are two main concepts: brute strength and fighting prowess. Their society abides by those two concepts. So let's see if, to their credit, they have that represented in here anywhere. So the first thing we're looking at is a huge giant neutral evil. Neutral evil means that a creature has no complications about harming others to get what they want, but neither will they go out of their way to cause carnage or mayhem when there is no direct benefit. So with frost giants being raiders, they don't make their own things, they steal other creatures' things essentially. So that's a very fitting alignment for a frost giant. Ability scores are fine, saving throws are good. Skills, I personally think intimidation should be in here because they are raiders. You would imagine them to... They have a prowess for fighting, but also they should probably have some sort of intimidating presence about them. So I think intimidation as a skill would be a good idea to put on the Frost Giant stat block. Damage immunities, cold. I would hope they have cold immunity. In fact, in their lore it states anything that is above the temperature of the blood of their enemies or creatures that they kill is too warm to the point that it hurts them and causes tremendous discomfort. So you will see on my stat block what I did to represent this. Also, it also states in their lore that they are immune to poisons, to at least being poisoned, and they are resistant to poisons. So I added that to my stat block also. We have languages giant. They actually speak like Jotunheim, I believe, something like a form of frost giant. They have their own language. You could even just put frost giant on here if you wanted to. Have 8. Mine is going to be much higher, but I'm also going to be trying to make a video on like lower level giants, just so that people have like that introduction to the giant, because I think the baseline for all giants should be raised up a bit for the true giants. So let's get into it. Here we go. The most boring part about every giant is they all only can do 2 things, except when you get to the very top of the ordering. So he makes 2 great axe attacks. His great axe does 3d12 slashing damage, which is a lot. There's going to be a controversial change on my stat block you're going to see. And then with the rock, it does 4d10 bludgeoning damage. But if you look at the artwork for the Frost Giant rock, it is encased in ice, but the boulder itself looks really small. So I actually did something sort of flavorful on my stat block, and we're going to get into that, speaking of, right now. Alright, this is the DM Dungeon Mastery approved official trademark Frost Giant stat block. Let's get right into it, and starting off with the abilities and traits of the Frost Giants. I didn't make any changes up here other than I added Commoner into the creature tag, and that is because I want this to represent what a baseline Commoner Frost Giant should be. And yes, they are fighters. They are all good at combat. That is a common Frost Giant. Just like all my other giants, I intend those to be the common version of that giant. And I definitely do want to go through and maybe make a compilation video of redoing some of the different variant giant stat blocks from the different books, like Big B's Presents Giants and whatever other variant giants there are in the other books. So anyways, let's continue with this. Armor class, I didn't touch anything with the ability scores, armor class, hit points, or speed. Saving throws and skills have gone up by 1 with their oh god, what is the word? The adding. I can't think of it, my brain isn't working today. I did add an intimidation skill because I do feel like Frost Giants use shock tactics in their combat maneuvers. Intimidation should be a core part of the creature stat block. Now, here comes the first big change. This is going to change Frost Giants permanently. They have a vulnerability to fire damage, and I know fire damage is the most common damage in the game, but it makes sense. If the blood of the creatures that they kill is too hot for them to handle, or is the baseline for just before things start getting too hot for them to handle, they should have a vulnerability to fire damage. And this would also make a loreful, flavorful change so that the fire giants that are above them know this. They know that Frost Giants are vulnerable to fire, and they use that as leverage against them to maintain the ordering, the hierarchy. I did give them a resistance to poison because in their lore they have celestial blood flowing through their veins still, which makes them very resistant to poisons. This kind of helps a little bit, but it doesn't really offset the fact that they have a vulnerability to fire damage. They still have immunity to cold. I didn't change anything other than the challenge rating from 8 up to 12, so that gives more XP per kill, and their proficiency bonus as a result has gone up from that. That's why the saving throws have all gone up by 1. Now we get into my version of the Frost Giants abilities and traits. We have Massive Combatant, which if you've watched my other giant videos, they all have this, but it's different variations of it depending on the giant. I took Rip off of the Hill Giant and I gave it to the Frost Giant, so I will be revisiting the Hill Giant and giving them a different ability that I overlooked after rereading their wiki. So be on the lookout for that video. I did give them Ice Walk because they didn't have this, and if you go off of the rules as written, if a Frost Giant were to try to walk across a frozen lake, they could slip and fall, which is it just seems silly to me. So I had to change it, and I gave them Ice Walk. So now they can move across and climb icy surfaces without needing to make an ability check. Difficult terrain composed of ice or snow doesn't cost it extra movement. It shouldn't. They're huge creatures that live in the snow. That is their home base. They shouldn't have any disadvantage fighting from their home in the snow. We have Overrun. Here's the first Viking-esque barbarian shock tactic that I added to their stat block to really make them feel like these raiders. So, the giant can move through the space of creatures that are smaller than it. When the giant enters the space of a hostile creature of its choice for the first time on its turn, and this just means the first time on the creature's turn. Actually, no, so that he can overrun multiple creatures, but he would obviously take opportunity attacks if he started walking past people, so there would be a bit of a disadvantage to doing that, but essentially he charges into you and he attempts to knock you over prone. which you're fighting a giant, you're gonna get knocked off your feet eventually. So it's a DC 17 strength saving throw or be knocked prone if he walks into your space for the first time on his turn. Ordining's hierarchy is the same loreful part of the Ordining with, you know, the frost giants are above stone and hill giants, so they have advantage on persuasion, intimidation, and deception checks because the other giants look up to them, so they essentially take their word as absolute truth, essentially. And then we have brute strength. This is where the loreful change brute strength and fighting prowess being part of their culture I implemented with brute strength, and this is essentially I took the bugbear and I gave it to the frost giant, and I know that's going to be a lot of damage, and you are right, it is going to be a lot of damage. So they deal an additional damage die with their melee weapon attacks and their crush and smash abilities. And then we have the first once a day ability here, menacing attack. This comes in with that shock raiding Viking tactics. When they hit a creature with a weapon attack once per day, they can force it to make a wisdom saving throw, and the DC is against whatever the frost giant rolls on this intimidation check. So he can make an intimidation check, and then that's the wisdom saving throw DC of the creature. If it fails, the creature's frightened of the giant until the giant's next turn. I think that's a flavorful, awesome ability that really makes them feel like a Viking raider, but huge, like they should be. They should be terrifying to fight. You have to imagine they have a weapon that could probably easily cleave through a building like paper. So that concludes the abilities and traits section. Let's move on to the actions. Alright, moving into the actions, I had to make a quick impromptu change to the multi-attack. So he makes two attacks, they make two attacks using its great axe, fist, or combination of them. So the giant can use its great axe and then punch something. It could punch or stomp something. It just depends on how you want to rule it. I just want to have a variation in how they attack, so they don't only have to swing their great axe twice. And you'll see that they can use a bolas attack. A bolas, I think that's how it's pronounced. And you'll see that in a minute once I get to it. Now, here's where the terrifying amount of damage that a frost giant can do comes in. So the huge great axe that I renamed because it is a huge weapon. It is 3 sizes larger than a regular weapon. Actually, it's 2 sizes because it would be large then huge. So it's 2 sizes larger than a normal man's weapon. Just picture that. In the hands of a creature that is a massive humanoid. So it does 4d12 plus 6 slashing damage, or the average damage of 32 per hit. That's a lot of damage. But keep in mind before you throw your pitchforks up and torches, they have a vulnerability to fire damage. So they can be felled with proper planning as long as you take into account that they are weak to fire damage. So if you exploit their weakness, you can fell a frost giant consistently, I'll say. I don't want to say easily because they shouldn't be killed easily, but keep that in mind. 4d12, it is a lot, I know, but they have a vulnerability, so I think that balances it out a little bit. So moving on to the next attack, we have the Icy Boulder attack, and I will put artwork up on screen of what the boulder looks like. I should have done this for the other giants. I only thought of it by the time I got to the frost giant. So this boulder originally dealt 4d10 bludgeoning damage, but I split the damage between bludgeoning and cold damage because it is a frost encrusted boulder, but that also makes it so that if you bring something like a potion of cold resistance, you can reduce some of the damage from the frost giant. So it does kind of balance out the immense amount of damage that you would take from a great sword swing from a giant. And it does reduce the movement speed by 5 feet if the creature is smaller. So same concept with the hill giant. If you get smashed by the boulder, you're a small creature getting hit with a boulder, you should probably be dazed slightly from that at the very least. So I was going to make it 10 feet, but I stayed with 5 feet. Now we move on to the huge ice bolas, and if you don't know what a bolas is, it is essentially a long rope or chain with two heavy weights on each end, and they throw it, and as it spins through the air and it hits its target, it wraps around the target. So what frost giants use is, instead of large like metallic weights, they use huge chunks of ice. So I wanted to have the frost giant deal cold damage some way, and I picture them holding, you know, at least a couple of these on them, maybe 3 to 4 of them, because you have to think frost giants go hunting for big creatures like dragons and mammoths or whatever large are native to their area that they are from in your world. So they probably have some sort of hunting equipment that they would bring with them. And imagine, you know, you're getting hit with this as a smaller creature. So it does 1d8 bludgeoning damage plus 2d10 cold damage as you're restrained by the ice encrusted chains. And then it's a really big strength saving throw at the start of each of the creature's turns. And I made it at the start, so if you do break out, you get to use the rest of your turn, so it's not frustrating to the point where you just go, oh, I lost my whole turn because I couldn't move. So somebody can help you break free if they destroy the chain, which has 30 hit points and an AC of 18, which would free the creature if they destroyed it. We have a fist attack. It's your basic fist attack, except the frost giants does an additional die, so it does 4d6 instead of 3d6 because they have brute strength. Stomp, same concept, 4d4. If he stomps on you, you have to make a strength saving throw or fall prone under the weight of the giant's foot. This DC should actually be 18, so let me change that very quickly because I think I copied and pasted it from my other giant stat block. So we're going to make that an 18. Update stat block here. Yep, there we go. DC 18 on par with all its other DCs. And now this is the secondary once per day ability. This is how frost giants deal cold damage. It's only once per day, so it's like they muster up a big enough breath from their lungs and they exhale it in a 15-foot cone. So it's not a really large cone. I didn't want it to be on par with a dragon's breath weapon, but they are also huge creatures, so it's a sizable enough cone. Each creature in the area must make a Constitution saving throw or take 6d6 cold damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. And then additionally, if this damage when you get hit with it, your speed is reduced by 10 feet, so it's like it's freezing you. But if it reduces you to 0 hit points, it doesn't kill you. It drops you to 1 hit point instead, and you have the petrified condition, and you get frozen into a statue. But if the statue takes bludgeoning damage, it shatters, so you break like ice, Sub-Zero style. Kills the frozen creature. But if the statue takes fire damage, the creature thaws, it takes no damage from that fire damage, and it ends the petrification condition. This DC should actually be 17 because this goes off of Constitution. So I'm going to change that to something I overlooked. So if you don't know how to calculate saving throw DCs, it's always 8 plus proficiency bonus plus the relevant ability score modifier. So because the frost giant is using this from his body, I'm gonna choose Constitution as the modifier. So it's 8 plus proficiency plus Constitution, in case you didn't know. Now here we go into the massive combatant skills. This is the first one. This is an action. Everything goes off of Snatch. You'll notice I took Fling out and I made it part of Snatch. So stone giants are the only ones that can use Fling as an action. The giant attempts to grab a smaller creature and hold on to it. The target creature within 10 feet must make a dexterity saving throw, DC 17. On a failed save, the creature is grappled and restrained by the giant. I have to change that also, so I apologize. I am making a mess of this video here. So we'll put that to 18. So the giant is reaching his hand down. Now, people, I think, might see this as a bit overpowered, but in reality, if you went rules as written, because the giant is 2 sizes larger than you, they can just auto grapple you. So at least the characters get a chance to try to evade it with a saving throw. So if they get snatched, we'll have to move into the bonus action section to see what can happen to them. Alright, into the bonus actions, the final chapter of our Frost Giant crusade here. We have Crush, so if the giant has a creature held in his hand by the snatch ability, he can just squeeze you and crush you in his hand, and you take 4d6 plus 6 bludgeoning damage, but you remain held, so you remain snatched in his hand. Then we have Smash. The giant spikes a snatched creature into the ground or an object nearby, dealing 5d6 bludgeoning damage instead of 4. So all of these, the damage die from these just went up by 1 from the brute strength ability, if you're wondering why they're a little bit higher. And then after he smashes you into the ground or a building nearby, you fall and land prone, no longer snatched. And then we have Fling, which is this is the giant's throw ability that I made just part of Snatch, so it's a little bit more straightforward. So the giant, clutching the smaller creature tightly, tosses it through the air with a powerful throw. A creature held by the giant is hurled up to 60 feet in a direction of the giant's choice, taking 1d6 bludgeoning damage for every 10 feet thrown and landing prone. Now here's the coup de grace finishing maneuver, the scary thing that a frost giant could do if he had both of his hands free and got them onto a smaller creature. This is part of the shock tactics abilities of these giants. So they're brutal. They're not savage like the hill giant, where a hill giant would just eat you. They're gonna make a message out of ripping your body apart. So they use 2 hands attempting to rip a snatched creature apart. Keep in mind, their great axe is 2-handed. It requires both hands, so they have to put the great axe away in order to do this ability. Now, it's just to swing the great axe, so they could still technically hold a creature in their hand like this, but they won't be able to really utilize these abilities unless it didn't have its great axe in its hand. Keep that in mind. Now, back to Rip. So it deals 6d10 slashing damage, and if this reduces the target to 0 hit points, they die immediately as their body is ripped in half, and then all allies within 50 feet of a creature killed this way can make a wisdom saving throw or be frightened of the giant until the start of the giant's next turn. If the creature survives, its movement speed is reduced by 10 feet until it receives magical healing. So technically, if it just gets hit with a healing word, 1d4, it's changing to 2d4, but its muscles sort of tore apart from being pulled in half, wishbone style. And then if it survives, the giant tosses it and it lands prone within 5 feet of the giant. So I believe that this makes for some really nasty Norse Viking-esque frost giant tactics. If you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments, but also remember, feel free, if this feels like too strong of a baseline commoner giant for your world, you can absolutely change abilities around, take abilities out, reduce the damage. You can take away brute strength, and that will really hamper the damage if you think brute strength is a little bit too much. I am a jockey when it comes to lore, so I love adding abilities in that represent that creature based on its lore as a dungeon master. So we go from Frost Giant walking in, it can hit something with its great axe twice or throw a boulder, to now he can hit something with his great axe twice, he can stomp on it, he can punch it, he can throw a bolas and entangle it up in this bolas. The creature could use its frost breath to exhale a cone of icy wind in a 15-foot cone. There's just a lot more things that happen now when you're fighting a frost giant, so it's not just, okay, we know what he's gonna do. He's going to throw a boulder or hit us with the great axe. Take cover behind that rock over there. Like, you just don't know what he's gonna do now because he has so many different abilities that he can do. So that's going to conclude our Frost Giant episode of Creatures But Better. I am DM Dungeon Mastery. If you are enjoying this series, please remember to like the video. I know YouTubers sound like a broken record when we say it, but it does truly help us out with exposure. It doesn't cost you anything. It takes 2 seconds. You just click that little like button. Subscribe, and remember, ring the bell of warning. The frost giants are coming. And I'll see you guys in the next video.